At INdigital, we know the public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI net goes beyond industry standards, not only i3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
Carbyne, it's multimedia. You can get text, translate to whatever language, getting away with the legacy equipment and going into a cloud-based solution.
It's the first time in U.S. history that we have an EZNet through cloud-native call handling.
As a police officer, to have the victim go video, that's unheard of.
You're getting upgrades every month, not every year.
To schedule your free Carbyne demo, please visit carbyne.com/WTT.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned. Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by INdigital as well as Carbyne, and a big shout out to patrons as always. Thank you so very much for everything. I wouldn't be able to do what I do without all of you, but especially all of you who are watching, listening, sharing, supporting, and all that good stuff. So thank you so much for being here, and I am super excited for this episode today. Before we get started here, I just want to say thank you to everyone out in Georgia. Cobb County was recently out there with 911 Wonder Women Inc. And I'm not only a board member for this amazing nonprofit, but I was also out there assisting with their workshop on finding your voice, which is basically like putting together presentations and such from the ground up, as well as talking about the art of storytelling. So thank you very, very much to Melissa and Todd and Robbie and Samantha, just everybody out there at Cobb County, and especially to my good friend, Sarah Weston, for bringing me along so that I could assist with this entire workshop. It was an excellent one, and I look forward to the next one. We also have other conferences that are going to be coming up, and hopefully we'll be doing Imagine Listening out there. And again, for those who don't know, Imagine Listening is a session that I do at different conferences where dispatchers come in. It's basically a peer support session. They share for the first 30 minutes their own IM 911 stories, which can be emotionally intense. But then at the end of it, the last 30 minutes is open mic, and that's where we share all the funny stuff that happens in 911, because, there's a lot of chaos and horror that can be 911, but there's a lot of good things as well, and a lot of funny things that happen that you can't make this stuff up. When you hear the stories, you think, is this real life? And it definitely is. we posted some recently, and they were hilarious. And it's the situation that we joke about, because if you don't have some sort of humor in this line of work, man, it is going to eat you up. And laughing is good medicine. So make sure to check all that stuff out. There's a lot of different things coming. But again, as I said before, I'm excited for this episode. And my guest today, we're going to jump right in, is Mr. Kevin Hazzard. He's a former paramedic as well as an author.
Hey,
hello,
man. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thank you for being here. I'm going to be honest, I have been on edge a little bit bringing you on, only because I'm just nervous. I'm like, okay, like I got to make sure we got the A game going and everything. And then when I pulled you up and I saw you had a hat on too, I was like, this is going to be good. We're going to lay back and talk about some stuff here. So I am super excited to have you on, man. It's an honor.
No, thank you. It's great to be here. Pleasure's all on this side of the table.
Awesome, awesome. So, we're just going to go ahead and jump right in, So you've got a couple of books. Actually, how many books do you have that you have published now?
Three. Many years ago, I wrote sort of rambling coming of age story when I was
Mhm.
like 22. Realized that I didn't have anything worthwhile saying yet, although it was published. It's called Sleeping Dogs.
Mhm.
And then that was kind of when I was like, all right, I need to get into something. So I actually have something to say, which was, of course, EMS. That led to 1,000 Naked Strangers, and then now American Sirens.
Ah, this is amazing. I always love, like, when I've gone to different conferences and I've done talks or whatever, I try anything that I talk about, I try to pull in my own life experience and compare it to dispatch or whichever to kind of, build that story and help people understand what it is that we do, in public safety. So I want to start out by kind of introducing you and giving some background to the audience. So how did you get involved in public safety to begin with?
Yeah, so it's let's say 2002,
Mhm.
2003, I guess '02, and I'm working as a reporter for a small newspaper. It's post 9/11. Got some friends who are in the military, and I go to dinner one night. One of my friends is, was among the first, you know, uh, Marines to go into Iraq, and I remember just feeling like, Jesus, man, like here like people I know are off doing things, and I'm at home covering city council meetings and stuff. So I just felt like at that age I was too young to be a witness. Like, I needed to take part, but I wasn't sure how to do that. One night I get sent to my editor sends me in the evening to this tunnel collapse in northwest Atlanta. They were doing this huge wastewater project, um, and the scaffolding collapsed. Imagine this massive hole, hundreds of yards wide, hundreds of feet deep, and these guys are down inside there, and the scaffolding just fell out from underneath them, and they disappeared into the earth. So I went out to cover this thing, and while I was there, the high angle technical rescue team showed up, and they were the ones who went down and pulled out the bodies. And I watched how they carried themselves when they went down. I watched how they carried themselves when they came up, how they dealt with the family. Um, I didn't know anything about what they were doing. I certainly didn't know anything about what a high angle technical rescue team was, but I could tell by the way that they carried themselves that these guys were it. They'd put their finger on something, and so that was it. It was literally a bang moment like that. I came home, told my wife, said, "I think I found it." She said, "All right, go do it."
Oh man, that that it gives me goosebumps. I know I've mentioned that a little bit before, even before we got started here with some of the stuff that we were talking about. But there's those moments in life that we end up going through, right? Where just like this, you end up seeing something, experiencing something, and it's just bam, like I've got it. Like I know what I want to do. So then you have this moment. You tell your wife this, and she tells you to go ahead and go. Where do you start? Where do you start from there?
So and I had to figure out how to do it. I
Yeah.
because luckily I'm at a newspaper, so I can just
Mhm.
walk into county government, city government, and I start walking into buildings and talking to people like, "Hey, you guys hiring over there in the fire department or the ambulance?" Like I didn't even know, like I had no.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody's like, "Yeah, sure, we're hiring qualified people," which of course was not me. So I've got to go online, find an EMT school, night class. So I do. I show up. I have zero belief that I can pull this thing off. At that point in time, my only experience with emergencies is an accident that I witnessed as a college student in which I totally panicked. Two jet skis are flying around, they crash into each other. The one guy literally gets the lower half of his face ripped off. He's floating in 90 feet of water without a chin, and here I am just freaking out. So that's my experience with blood and emergencies. And so I'm sitting in this classroom looking at this textbook, quite literally nauseous, because I'm realizing, because you like EMT textbooks, man, like they've got photos in there of bodies and injuries, and I'm just I'm looking at the degloving stuff, and I'm looking at just everything, and just thinking, there's no way. This is a huge mistake. I need to get out. But I stuck it out. Very quickly, I realized that there was, this door had been opened to this crazy world that very few people get to walk through. And,
Mhm.
and suddenly there I was. And I just said, fuck it, here we are. Let's do this.
Oh man. That it makes me think of how I got started in dispatch, and really I was the same way in the sense that I had no experience except for and I didn't really even have like an accident like that. For me, my experience was Rescue 911 with William Shatner. Like that was my shit. Like I loved that show, and at the end of every episode there was a good ending, right? The dispatch would meet the callers or whatever, but it's not like that in real life.
Yeah.
That doesn't always happen.
You don't want to meet
So
all those people.
yeah, yeah, no, exactly. So then, kind of like just kind of jumping in and everything, but I can see you sitting there looking at this book and thinking, damn, what have I gotten myself into? So then, you go through that, what was, I guess, the training process? Because if you were already having that thought process of like, shit, what is going on here, looking at these pictures and everything, but you stuck it out, of course. How did that training go then after that?
I mean, at first it was just exciting. Like I said,
Mhm.
it's this new world has been, revealed to you, and you kind of feel like Alice. You've walked through the door, and
Mhm.
oh my God, here it is. But as we got closer to go time, and you begin to realize, like, man, this is serious. Then I remember getting very serious and studying. I probably studied harder in EMT school than I did in paramedic school, simply because I was so terrified. You
Mhm.
know, I knew that I was about to enter this thing, and I had no concept of what was ahead of me, and I did not want someone to die because I had not been up to the task. Which, of course, is going to be the case anyway, right? Like you are going
Right.
to have those moments regardless. But I didn't
Yeah.
know that then. So I just thought, man, I better work hard. And so, I mean, I was around the clock. I mean, I knew I had that book memorized. So it was nerve wracking. But then, we did the third rides, and you ride in where we were. We rode with Grady, which is, the Atlanta's 911 service, hospital based. And the guys that I rode with, they were so competent. And so, one, it gave me a complex because I was like, there's no way I can move this fast. There's no way I can, this all is going to be so instinctual to me. But two, they were just like, dude, well, don't worry. Like, you're going to get out here and nobody's going to expect you to know a damn thing. Your partners are going to expect you to suck because you're going to suck. And we're going to teach you how not to suck. And that's how it's going to be. And I was like, oh, all right, then again, like, fuck it. Let's, you know what I mean? Like,
Right. Yeah.
you're either the kind of person who sounds like fun to you, hey, man, you're going to get tossed into this thing where people have been shot or choking or having a heart attack or, or just psychotic and angry and look for someone to beat the hell out of. And that's going to be what we're going to bring you into. Either that sounds like fun or it doesn't. And if it sounds like fun, then you're like, man, all right, I guess I'm ready. I don't know why, but I'm ready.
That is a great explanation of how a lot of us are as first responders, right? Because it is that it takes a certain person to be able to do this, and either, yeah, like you said, either you're like, hell yes, let's do this, or you're, oh shit, this isn't for me, and
Yeah.
you end up getting out, and hopefully, people find out before something crazy happens, but some people don't. They end up getting through. Shit happens, and then it's afterwards they're like, yeah, no, this wasn't really what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. There are those.
Yeah, I remember jumping in, and that first day going into dispatch. So I had waited a couple months, right? I had waited a couple months for to find out if I had gotten the job, and I hadn't heard anything. The chief of police shows up out of nowhere, and he asked me if I still wanted the job, and I said, yeah. I didn't think that I was going to get it. It's been 2 months, and he goes, well, our background process is pretty long. And I said, well, when do I start? Thinking it's going to be like next week, and he goes, no, you start tonight. And I said, oh, okay. And he goes, you still want the job, right? And I said, no, I do. I just wasn't expecting that. So my first shift is a 10 p to 6 a shift. And
Oof.
I walk in, meet my trainer, who I will simply say was very seasoned. And he shows me everything, takes a 911 call. I'm observing. And afterwards, he turns around and goes, okay, you're next. And I thought, hell no. Like, there's nothing else. There's no other training. And he goes, the only way you're going to do this is by jumping in and doing it. Now, I did have like a 40-hour beginners, dispatcher course that I took a few weeks later, but that first night was nuts. Like, I was sweating. Luckily, the first call that I took was a butt dial. It wasn't anything. It was a mistake. So I'm sitting there like, oh, thank the Lord. But it's the same thing, man. You end up getting in, and either you love it or you don't. And I immediately loved it. I wanted to get in there and help people. And so for you, you're going through the training, you're doing all this stuff, you're doing these ride-alongs. So how many years total did you end up doing this as a paramedic?
Yeah, I got in 03. I got out in 13. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's my time on the bus. So, a decade in the works. It was wild. And, the funny thing is my first call basically was very similar to yours, minus the butt dial. So I'm at a diner, and it's like I'm at this really very shady transport service, and I don't know if every city has them, but they certainly existed in Atlanta, where this is you're supposed to be doing to and from appointments, right? Like what they call totes. Like, oh, you got dialysis? Sure, here we come. The thing is, a lot of nursing homes will use these kind of ambulances for 911 calls, because a 911 call they have to explain.
Mm-hmm.
But if they call a non-emergency service, well, it was non-emergent. It was no big deal. So we just called non-emergency, like very easy to sweep under the rug, regardless of what's happening to the patient. So we get one of those calls, and we're in this diner, and the guy I was working with, he knew I was new, and he was excited about having somebody new and about freaking me out. Like, I mean, he was such a ghoul. And so the call drops, and he gets up and he runs out of the diner, like literally like trailing dollar bills behind him to pay for his coffee or whatever he'd gotten. We run out, we jump in the ambulance, we get there, and it's this dude flat out. He probably weighs 97 pounds. He's in this nursing home, 97 pounds in a diaper, but he has this belly. It looks like he's just swallowed a whole frozen turkey. And he's hot. I mean, he must be 107 degrees, and he's breathing like 63 times a minute. And he's totally unresponsive. And the nurse is like, yeah, I don't know. It's just been going on for like a minute. Like, I'm 30 seconds into this job. I know it has been going on for a minute. So we get him outside, and his belly, I mean, hard as a watermelon. Get to the ambulance. I'm expecting to take a blood pressure and a blood sugar. I still don't really know how to, like the candy and all that. It's all new. Like the whole thing, just oxygen is new to me. So I'm expecting to hop out of the ambulance and start driving to the hospital, which again, like also still new to me. I hadn't yet flipped on the Sirens, so I'm so new. First hour's new. And the paramedic jumps out, and I hear like gunk, gunk, and I just hit the door shut, and I look up, that like terrified deer in headlights look, and suddenly the ambulance is moving, and I poke my head through the window in the back. What are you doing? And he goes, you got to learn sometime. Well, not a butt dial, not the way to learn. And anyway, so the patient starts vomiting. I mean, of course, huge belly, massive GI bleed, starts just vomiting coffee grounds, emesis everywhere. So I spin him. He pukes all over the side of the ambulance, like drenches all of our equipment. I'm just trying not to get, digested blood puked up onto me. We get to the hospital, and the guy's only comment was like, next time, don't let him puke on all the equipment. Like, this is going to be a
Dude, that's some Exorcist shit right there.
and it's like, it's so classic EMS for your partner to be like, gotta learn sometime, and just leave you hanging.
Right. Yes. Oh man. So then, okay. So you've got that you're experiencing and everything. Was there any moment in your brain where you thought like, this is what I got myself into? But also on top of that, like, was there anything that kind of surprised you, going into this?
I mean, I think I'm surprised, as a lot of people are, when you get into medicine at any level, whether it's in an ambulance or an emergency room, that this is trial by error for new people. You know what I mean? Like you walk into, no matter what hospital you walk into, if it accepts residents, there's going to be somebody in there who's new, and there will be someone who's experienced, who's standing back, allowing this new person to make mistakes. I don't think you think of it that way when you think of medicine. You don't think, like, hey, someone's trying to figure out how not to let me die. But that's the reality. So that was shocking. But yet, then again, you do have to learn somehow. Like, perhaps there's a better way to do it than just, handing someone the phone and saying the next call is yours.
Yeah.
But you do have to learn, and you can't observe forever. At some point, you got to get in and do it. But it was nuts. But that's, again, I mean, I'm an impulsive person anyway. So for me, I just, like, hell yeah. But at 23 or whatever, this was just some kind of adventure that I was so ready for. And all of it whatever it would be, all of it just seemed exciting and new. And so, I mean, those feelings, those desperate moments are, they just kind of come alive. I remember about a year before I got into all this, there was this huge rainstorm. Some hurricane had passed up the East Coast, and we were just getting battered. And so it's 9:30 at night, 10 o'clock at night. I'm outside. Rain is pouring down. A tree had fallen and hit the corner of my house. There's like water that's getting into the attic, and the front yard was flooding. And it was starting to get like, it was soaking through the foundation. So I'm out there in the pouring rain, and I'm wearing nothing but underwear because it's raining so hard. Anything I wear is going to get soaked. And I'm trying to dig this trench and get this stuff out. And there's lightning and these tree branches. And I remember I was just laughing because it was all like, I'm out on the lawn in my underwear, and nobody, like, we are so beyond a fuck it moment that, so I knew that brand of chaos just appealed to me. And so when I hit the ambulance and realized that's what this was, that this is, you just trying to, survive the rodeo of chaos that is an emergency call, then I was like, yeah, man, this is like, I'm in the right place.
That is hilarious. Like I can see you almost like Cousin Eddie, from Christmas Vacation out there digging this trench, like shitter's full.
Exactly.
Yeah, going through this chaos. But you're right, because that is that exact same thing. Like I've had conversations with friends and family, especially my siblings, and I'll be laughing about something, and they're just staring at me.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, what? They're like, why are you laughing at that? I was like, because you have to find some sort of humor in this, because otherwise it's going to eat you up, or it's just gonna bring you down. So you have to find some way in this chaos that is emergencies that are coming in, people calling for help during what is very much their nightmare, to be able to help them. And I found it the same way. For me, a 911 call, I've always explained it as basically being in a car, slamming the gas and letting go of the steering wheel, because anything can happen, and you're just going forth with what you have.
Yeah.
And you have all this training, but sometimes that the training stays in the back of your head, and you just have to simply be human, and you have to talk to people and relate with them, and until help gets there. So it's a crazy thing. Now, talking about your calls and stuff, some of these some of the ride-alongs as well, when you were doing the ride-alongs, were you just observing, like in the beginning, that is, or were they asking you for help or any of the other things to get you prepared more for it?
Yeah, they kind of toss you in. I mean, if your patient is dying, I've certainly had enough ride-alongs and trainees. I was an FTO for a while. If the patient is dying and the person's not doing anything, you kind of shove them out of the way and get going. But
right.
Yeah, until that moment, as long as you prove yourself capable of continuing to, operate, then people are just going to allow you to do it, and they just, which is the idea. And then you realize later, you're like, oh man, these guys were just so happy. I mean, there's nothing better than when you get, medics can tell you, you get a paramedic third rider, and like you are chilling that day because that dude's writing reports. That dude is, he's the one who's got to, suction out, trachs, and he's doing all that. He's doing the grody stuff, and you're just kind of chilling and chit chatting with the bystanders, which was always I half wanted to become a homicide investigator partway through this job, because my favorite part was just pawing through somebody's house, and like opening up their medicine cabinets and piecing together like, what are the weird things that occurred here that created this moment. And you can do that when you've got a third rider. So I think people on an ambulance appreciate, as long as you're not a jerk, they appreciate somebody else being there to do the work.
Oh, that is a part that I can definitely relate with you in picking apart certain things and try to solve things as well.
Yeah.
Just being on the phone, you're not just listening to the caller, but you're listening to the background, things that are going on, especially if you're just going through yes or no questions with somebody because they can't really speak. So then you're listening to everything there and telling them everything that is going on, and you might hear something. Now, during your time as a paramedic, did you ever have a moment where maybe some sort of life experience helped you out on a certain run? And what I mean by that, I'll give you a quick example, is I was training someone who was new once, and it was a domestic call, and I'm listening on the other end on the it doesn't look the same, but on the umbilical cord that we had connected with our headsets. And I heard the person hang up the phone, okay? But there was a pulse. There was a pulse that I heard. It wasn't a dial tone. It was a pulse. So I immediately told my trainee, do not hang up the phone. And she goes, okay, well, why? And I said, that was a pulse that we just heard. And me being old, I remember rotary dial. And if you know, with the pulse, if one person left that phone open and the other person picked up again, the line is still connected. So I told her to stay on, because the person was going to pick up the phone again. And sure as shit, the person picks up the phone, tries to dial 911 again. And I told her, say something now. So they went through it. We got help there. Everything was fine, but we hang up and she goes, how did you know that? And I said, well, first of all, I'm old. And two, I used to play on the phone as a kid with my friends, and we would keep the line open, and when they would pick up the line again, we would scream to scare them. So that's what I mean by life experience. Did you ever have any of those moments where you're going on a run and something just pops in your head and you're like, I know what to do, or just something that ended up coming handy?
Yeah, actually, there are two of them. One is weird, and so we had this dog. He was a pit bull lab mix, this huge, like, bear-looking dog, crazy. We found him living on the street. Great dog, wonderful dog, a total beast. Terrified of thunderstorms, like, terrified. We go to the vet. Like, what can we do? And she prescribed. I don't remember the name of it anymore. She prescribed some sort of sedative, and so whatever, like, the dog takes it. It never really worked, but we would try. So a few years later, there's a woman who's unconscious, unresponsive in a house, and we're, once again, like, digging through, trying to figure out what it might be. And there's this thing, and it's got, the little label, and it's got a dog on the label, and, whatever the name of the veterinary office, and the doctor with DVM next to it. And everybody ignores it. And I was like, no, that's a sedative. Nothing else here makes any sense. It could be anything, right? However, there's a sedative here that's empty. It says 25 pills. It was filled, I forget now, but let's say 6 days before. That dog did not take 25 pills in the last 6 days. There's a decent chance that this is what she took. And it turned out that was the case. And when we got to the ER, the doctors didn't know, like, they didn't know what this medicine was. I handed them the bottle. They didn't know what it was. But I'm the rare person who just happened to have this, crazy ass dog that needed a sedative. The other was, once I had kids, when my son was born, he had some respiratory issues, and he got non-RSV bronchiolitis when he was very young. That very quickly spiraled into pneumonia. He was a couple weeks old. And if you know that type of illness, and you picture, a lot of kids get very, very sick from that. Picture a kid now who's about 6 weeks old. It got serious. It got real serious. And the result, once he got out of the hospital, which was this long, scary ordeal, once he got out of the hospital, he continued to have various issues. Respiratory issues. And it took a couple of years before he could stop taking albuterol and all that other stuff. And he just became, a regular kid. But that experience of being around a very young child who is gasping for air and having to deal with it, like, if you want to talk panic, your own kid will make you panic, believe me. So from then on, and there's Atlanta, just demographics, location, whatever, we have, big respiratory issues here in the city. And so you're going to run a lot of kids with asthma. And, I was so calm and comfortable with it because I had dealt with it on as personal level as you could get. And I could also look at the parents and say, look, I know where you're coming from here. Like, I get it. You and I are in the same boat, and be able to deal with it quickly, competently, without freaking out. Because, everybody, when it comes to kids, everybody's nervous. It's like the drugs are different. The doses are different. Their reaction to these drugs are going to be different. Your ability to say, like, hey, is that working? Out the window with a 4-month-old. So yeah, I mean, those two things stand out. That, like, definitely, when it comes to EMS, life imitates art, the other way around.
Exactly. And I feel like a lot of, whether it be a run or a call, whatever it may be, that we deal with, I'm a firm believer, some of those are meant for us because we have that experience. We would be able to help those folks better than anybody else, again, because we've lived it, we've experienced it. And there are other things that I've gone through that have done the same. and it has always helped. And talking to more people, having people come on, share their stories and stuff, it seems like it's the same. Some of these calls, they're just meant for us because we have that experience. Now, how do you feel before we kind of transition into this amazing book that we're going to be talking about here? How do you feel that the job changed you in any way?
I mean, it changes your outlook. I think
Mhm.
it'd be hard for it not to change your outlook. I can't tell you, and I'm not unique here. I can't tell you how many times I would be standing over someone who had just been in a car accident or had a heart attack, whatever, but is dead. And you're looking at their wallet because, like you need a PCR. And so you pull out the information and reading this person's particulars and saying, like, man, their family doesn't know yet. Like somewhere out there are people having a normal day.
Right.
And this guy's dead. This is going to change everything. How many kids do you have to pronounce, who got wrapped up in a blanket and didn't, and woke up stiff in the morning? How many people do you have to see ejected from a car or shot or strokes or whatever, right? Before you say, like, they don't know. I know, but they don't know yet. And that sort of thing, it's very difficult to live day to day. It's very difficult to live in the moment. It's not very many of us are Buddhists, like it's super hard ethos to live by when you've got to think about like saving money and, hey, where are we going on vacation next year? Like the future isn't like people can say like, oh, today's the only day that is. That doesn't even make sense. Like, no, like, the world's not going to end in fucking 15 hours. Tomorrow is also a day. Like,
Right.
yesterday's a day because I pissed somebody off yesterday and they're here today like mad about it.
Mm-hmm.
So time is everywhere, right? And so it's very hard to live in a moment. And at the same time, when you see things like that, it to me it's a reminder, especially in more hectic moments, like stop for a second, take a deep breath, be thankful for what this is. Like there's something good happening. I'm looking at my window. It's a gorgeous day right now. It's a Friday of all things. It's a gorgeous fall Friday. I mean, what a great day. I've got so much stuff that I want to do, that I need to do, that I'm stressed about, but yet, like take a minute. And those, to me, that's the big one. That's the big one.
Yeah, I fully agree with you there that those moments where, I struggled with it in the beginning, and sometimes I think about it now, and I've even had people who listen to the show have sent in messages saying, why did you lie to these people? And what what I'm getting at is kind of like you say you're standing over someone who's passed away from whatever it is, whatever run that you went on, and their family doesn't know, their friends don't know, but you know. So for me, in that sense, on my end of it, taking this phone call, one specifically that I remember, this was like the last week that I was in dispatch. It seemed like the dispatch universe, the gods were sending me every shit call, almost like a gang I was getting beat out of, with all of these calls that were hitting so hard. This guy came home to find his soon-to-be ex-wife. She had committed suicide, and he wanted me to call his daughter. And I called the daughter. Now, I didn't tell her what happened. I couldn't tell her. I know exactly what happened. I know she's gone, but she's asking me over and over and over, what is happening? What is going on there? And all I could tell her was, there's a medical emergency there. Your father's out there with your mother, and you just need to get over there. And I remember talking about this and people saying, why did you lie to her? And I remember I said, you don't want to create more victims. You don't want to create more, heartache there. If I would have told her exactly what happened, she's going to be rushing to get there. What if she ends up crashing because she's so, I don't want that on me. I mean, that's also a liability as well. But there was some of those things, that kind of stick with you, that there are things that that you can't say because it'll possibly cause something worse. And that was always a hard thing. But also to have people be like, dude, why did you lie to her? It's like, I kind of had to. Like,
Yeah.
there's where are you going to go with it?
It's a tough one.
Yeah, definitely. So you were in this until 2013, right? And you were doing all of this. You said that you had left. You really didn't think you were going to go back. But why did you transition out? If you don't mind me asking, why did you transition out to begin with?
Well, a couple of reasons. I mean, one, mid 30s.
Hmm.
I never wanted to work anywhere other than on an ambulance in the middle of the city. We didn't have stations. We were, 13-hour shifts in the ambulance running nonstop. Um, I liked that. That was what appealed to me about the job. I had friends who were, maybe some of them were taking a tech job at a hospital or going to nursing school. Maybe some were going to fire departments in suburban places. I wasn't why I did this. I certainly, someone said, "Do you want to be a supervisor?" And I was like, I don't. Again, not why I did this. So that was part of it. Was how long can you do that?
Hmm.
The other was, I had other things that I had done before this. I had been a writer beforehand, and I wanted to get back into that. That's a huge part of me that I can't switch off. That's it's a compulsion. It's what I do every day, regardless. So I knew I needed to get back to that. That there was something else. But also, the job is tough, and I think the world views things differently now. You and I were talking earlier. It used to be that regardless of the call, like you kept that in, however hard it was, and we all have them. Nobody's unique. Everybody has those calls that you will never forget. Some of them are horrible things you've seen. Some of them more times than not. At least with me, there are those. There's somebody out there who's not alive because the moment they needed me, I wasn't as good as I needed to be. That thought is with you when you go to bed at night, man. Like you don't just forget that kind of thing. And so, like, it kind of weighs in you. I was burned out, and it was time to transition, and it was kind of, my wife had this job opportunity, and we were like, you know what, like the time has come, and so we packed up and we moved, and to a certain degree, I hung them up.
Damn. You and I got out the same year then, 2013. That was my year as well, that I ended up leaving for the private side of 911, still doing what I'm doing right now. But then, it just continued. It was, I had to do something to help myself as well, but hopefully 911 as a whole with, having people come on to share their stories, because it's therapeutic to talk about a lot of this stuff where now, it's a new day and we're able to do it. So you end up um, writing and publishing a book called A Thousand Naked Strangers, right? And tell me about this really quick before we get into American Sirens here, because the title alone is intriguing.
Yeah, so the title came to me one night. I'm driving someone to the hospital, and they said, "What's this job like?" And it was like I'm driving, my partner's in the back, and I'm probably 7 years in at this point, and we're double medic truck, so it's like a very easy night for me because I'm the driver. And somebody's mother or wife or whatever, I just remember it was a woman sitting next to me, and she said, "What's the job like?" And I don't know where it came from or why. It must have been percolating somewhere in my head. And I said, it's like being invited into the homes one after another of 1,000 naked strangers. And you think that's really, like both metaphorically, right? People are at their most vulnerable, they're most exposed. They are willing to tell you things that they won't even tell their families. They get honest with you in a hurry because of the vulnerability and the trust. The other is that quite literally, a lot of these people are naked. Generally, you don't know any of them. A couple you do, but these are strangers. Oftentimes, with their wieners out, and so
right.
That was, and so once I said that, I just it crystallized in my mind. I had no intention of writing the book at that point, but that idea, that notion, I was like, that's what this is. So when I decided to write the book, there was no other way to go.
Oh man. So this basically does it kind of share your journey through being a paramedic, or just some of the calls?
Yeah, it follows the arc of starting with like, here's this kid who has no idea what he's doing, but he knows he wants to get involved, all the way up through to the end.
Oh,
like
that's amazing.
All the crazy things that happen in between.
Oh, I'm definitely going to be reading that one next, because that sounds excellent. And so now, we end up getting into, a book that you wrote and recently published and released. Is called American Sirens, the incredible story of the Black men who became America's first paramedics. So I have to ask, how did you, because I had not heard this story before. There are a lot of forgotten stories, right, throughout our history, and this is just one of them. So how did you even find this? How did you, I mean, you're a paramedic, right? Former paramedic, of course. Were there any times during your training that
Yeah.
any of what you found out, nothing was ever mentioned? See,
Not a
again,
beat.
forgotten
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, completely. Somebody mentioned it to me. Somebody who had read the book sent me an email. I wish I knew who that person was or knew where that email was, but someone said, "Hey, have you ever heard of this thing called Freedom House?" Which I hadn't. And I started researching what it was. And I found a couple little bits and pieces. And I kept thinking, like, any moment I'm going to find the definitive story.
Yeah.
You know, like I once watched a competitive eating contest, and I was like, "What is this weird thing?" And I Googled it, and like, sure enough, there's a book out there called Four Horsemen of the Esophagus, which is this crazy book about competitive eating. So I kind of thought, like, you know, that's going to happen. I'm going to come across the definitive account of this thing. And I didn't. No, it just wasn't anywhere. And it was crazy because if you go to EMT or medic school, at some point, someone's going to mention Napoleon because he's the first one who did triage, and he's the first one who was using a carriage to get soldiers off the field and quickly to care. You learn that. You learn that Bellevue had these doctors in the late 19th century. You learn that in 1965, there was this thing called the White Paper that said that EMS was totally out of its depth and all but useless because it had not advanced its training and equipping of the people who were on ambulances. You know, again, 65, the word paramedic doesn't exist. But nobody tells you how we made that leap. You know, what you know is in 1965, there are hearses. And then suddenly there's, you know, Johnny and Roy, like as if they, you know, these two guys, you know, sprang from the fertile waters of the White Paper, you know, and were just sort of created out of thin air. That's what you know. And so then you begin researching it. You realize, no, there's a chapter, a really important, incredibly inspiring, infuriating, classically American chapter of this story, of our story that hasn't been told. So wow. That was a bone I couldn't let go of.
You know, and just listening to you talk about it, I can see you there researching and finding little bits here, putting this puzzle together through these pieces that you're finding, but also almost obsessed in a way, you know, to a point where you're like, I have to find more. I need to track down this person. I need to track down this part of the story and put it all together. I mean, what was that process like for you? For me, just thinking about it, just from the outside looking in, probably a lot of coffee and late nights of you researching and trying to figure this all out.
A lot of coffee and early mornings. I'm an early morning writer. I'm like a 4 a.m. writer. So, once I realized that this thing was out there and that there was probably an incredible story, you know, you don't have to read a million books to realize that there's a big story, right? You know, there was, you know, at one point there was this group of guys who were in a crew team out of some college on the West Coast who went to the Olympics and won. Okay, great. But then you read The Boys in the Boat and you realize, like, oh my God, there's this incredible story behind it. You don't have to read 1,000 books to know that background, that incredible human story is within all of us. And if you dig deep enough, you're always going to find an incredible story behind the bigger story that tells a much more illuminating story than the large one ever could possibly do. So I knew as soon as I started digging it, I was like, if I can find these people, when you learn that, you know, the White Paper comes out and there's this doctor named Peter Safar, father of CPR, who sits down and redesigns the ambulance and develops a paramedic course, and then goes out with the help of a man named Jim McCoy and recruits a couple dozen black men from Pittsburgh's Hill District to become the world's first paramedics. You don't have to be a genius to know that somewhere buried in there is an incredible story about these people. Like, why did this guy Safar do this thing? Yeah. Who was Jim McCoy? And these guys that they recruited, who are they? And what brings a group of young men from a really troubled neighborhood into a field that technically doesn't exist? And why do they do that? You know, that the people that we are most likely, you know, like, let me just be blunt for a second. These are the guys that if you saw them you'd most likely like lock your car door, hold tighter to your purse, you know, mid-60s. These are black guys from a not good neighborhood. This is a demographic that the world typically is intimidated of and expects bad things from. Like those guys totally defied expectations by revolutionizing medicine and becoming the ultimate caregivers. Who are they? And so, I mean, it just, that's an incredible story. You just, So, I mean, constantly I was working on it.
Oh my Lord. So okay, so before we dig deeper into the story here, and of course, I don't want to give it all away. Like we're gonna hit some points and stuff, and of course have people check it out and all. But how long was this process then that you went through, and like the research, like all
Yeah.
of that? How long did that actually last before started like pen to paper, started putting it together?
So it happened in multiple stages. I started researching in August of 2018.
Hmm.
I wrote a magazine article in spring of 2019. So that was like maybe 8 months, give or take, of research, not all of it, but some of it, that I got the magazine commission because I needed somebody to pay for my plane ticket so I could fly around the country and go to these various archives. I needed that. And then that comes out and somebody says, hey, Roman Mars is the 99% Invisible podcast. He's like, man, this is an episode we want to do. So that pays for a little bit more research.
Yeah.
So now we're into 2020, and my agent said, okay, the world is in flames. This story that you've been working on and sort of chiseling at the edges of is at the heart of everything we're talking about right now. You need to write this. This needs to be a book. There's so, and I knew there was more. And so I said, okay, we went and I wrote a proposal and publisher, bought the book, but so all in, from the time it was published, from the time I started to the time it was published, you're talking 4 years. That includes all the research, the article, the podcast, and then the writing of the book, the researching for the book, the whole thing.
Oh, geez, this is definitely a long process, but and also imagine, that moment of satisfaction as well when everything is done and put together, and you're just, like there it is. There's that story. So set the stage for us here with this book. This entire story, this history. So as we kind of mentioned earlier, up until around the 1970s, if somebody was in a medical crisis, what was it? The police end up coming out, right? Or a hearse?
Yeah, it depends on where you live. If in some places it might be the police who show up in a wagon with a like a little stretcher. It might be the volunteer fire department, or it might be 2 undertakers from the local morgue, because who else can transport a body, right? Like they've got a hearse.
Right.
So you literally have undertakers that are embalming one night and transporting patients the next. So those are your 3 options, unless you just pick up your brother and chunk him in the back of the car and haul ass.
Jeez.
So that's what exists. And in '65 the white paper comes out, and the whole death and disability thing. And the white paper says that paramedics are too few to be there when you need them, and too unskilled to be of much use when they arrive. And they point out several key facts, which are explosive, but of course everybody knows them. And in 1965, more Americans die in highway accidents than in the entirety of the Korean War. And you're more likely to survive a gunshot wound in Vietnam than you are back in the US. And of course, it all comes down to paramedics, or rather the lack of anything, because again, paramedics don't exist. So it comes down to a lack of help. So there's this understanding, hey, we need to do something. But nobody knows what to do, because there's no mandate, there's no money, there's no direction. It's just, hey, there's a problem. Like we point at it, and there it is. That's a huge problem. Nobody knows what to do. And as luck would have it, there's a man in Pittsburgh named Peter Sapper who said, I'll do it,
Jeez. So before we get to Peter's part in this, as you mentioned, a hearse possibly going over there for transport. Was this? Do you think that was done? Was that mostly because there were not a lot of vehicles for transporting for whatever might have been available, or was it just simply assumed that the chances of surviving were that small that it was like, just in case, we'll send the hearse because they're going to have to transport the body anyway?
Oh man, it's probably a good bit of both. There's a lot of skepticism. Even in the '70s, there are a handful of doctors who were like, you can't practice medicine in a moving vehicle. The medical community does not like, they're not impulsive. unlike me. They don't necessarily spark to innovation. So this idea does not appeal to them. It had been, and so that's one thing, right? Everybody assumes like this is, really this is just glorified transportation. Let's not go crazy. The other part is World War II becomes this massive magnet that sucks people and material out of everything that doesn't go to the war effort. I mean, the fact that like our grandparents were out there cobbling together bits of soap because there was no more soap, right? Like to make new soap out of 75 pieces of old soap. So there's no extra anything. And one of the things there's no extra of is money and resources for this sort of fledgling EMS service, which had been building since World War I, had been slowly growing. World War I was sort of the great watershed moment for ambulance advance. World War II becomes the opposite, right? That's the moment where the wave recedes. So there's nothing in its place. And so, cities have they've just handed this problem to like who can't say no? Well, the police department maybe can't say no. Volunteer firefighters maybe can't say no. And funeral homes, like they'll probably take an extra $25 to do a quick run. I mean, my paramedic instructor was one of the first 6 medics in the state of Georgia. He started out in Hearst and he was like, we had nothing. We would just show up, flower petals streaming out of the back. And we would ask them, if you're bleeding, like, hey, do you have a towel so I can stop your dad from bleeding to death? Like that was it. It was very, it was lo-fi to say the least.
And I mean, that was not that long ago. It's not that long ago that all of this is going on, right?
Seconds before I was born.
Right. So, all of that. And, just, before, Peter comes into all of this and is like, yo, I'm here. We'll try this. We'll take a crack at it. A lot of these deaths that were happening, most of them, could say that they were preventable, right? There's just the training wasn't there.
Yeah. That's the big thing is that these are preventable deaths. There's a very famous one, 1966, Pittsburgh. This guy by the name of David Lawrence, he's a very famous politician, had been the mayor of Pittsburgh, had been the governor of Pennsylvania. He goes to address a rally, has a heart attack within 5 words of his address and drops on the floor. There happens to be a nurse in the crowd named Karen McGuire. She rushes forward, starts doing CPR, and somebody calls the police. In the city of Pittsburgh, that's who ran it, was the police. And they had these wagons. They had a military-style canvas cot. They had no equipment. They had very little training. These are guys at the end of their career. They show up, and from the moment they arrive, Lawrence is getting zero care. They pick him up. They run him out. There's an oxygen canister there, but it's either broken or empty. And they put him in, and they both start getting up front to drive. And the nurse, Karen McGuire, she realizes, like, oh my God, these guys aren't even going to stay with him. So she climbs in and does CPR as best she can. But they're in this, if you've ever imagine being in the back of a U-Haul truck that's speeding down the street, you're just
right
everywhere,
Right. Yeah.
It's not, it's bad enough in an ambulance where there are things like this is basically a big empty box truck. And they get to the hospital and they're able to restart his heart and get a healthy blood pressure on him and get him breathing, but he's brain dead. And that's because though the moment he hit the ground, Karen McGuire's there and is doing CPR, there's this extended period of time, 6 to 10 minutes from when the cops arrive until they pull up to the ER where nothing is happening. Well, we might not be neurologists, but we know, the brain can't sustain that. And so that was it, So Saffer becomes his like sort of the political fodder that he needed to say, here's this thing, we need to do it.
Oh man. Yeah. And so that's that pivotal moment, that this happens and is able to end up getting this funding, right. And everything to do this intense course. But before that, what was it that happened with Peter that, he kind of made it his mission? We kind of talked about this before we started recording, that there was something in his life that happened that really pushed him almost in a survivor's guilt mode to say, it is my mission to help people and save as many lives as much as possible in some way possible.
Yeah. So Saffer's born in Austria in the 1920s. And so he's a young kid when the Nazis stream across the border. He's living in Vienna. Immediately his life becomes living hell. His parents are doctors. His mother has Jewish ancestry, not enough that they're going to be dragged away, but enough that their lives are going to be difficult. The father refuses to return the Nazi salute. The family, though they have two doctors as a mother and father, Peter and his sister, their lives become very difficult. They often don't have enough to eat. He gets drafted into the German army and comes within a hair's breadth of being sent off to the Eastern Front, which at that point was really a death sentence. I mean, it is a meat grinder. He smears himself with this ointment to inflame some eczema. Looks like he's dying. He has to do this several times. Like, it's this crazy thing where these Nazi inspections pop up because they would come into the hospital to make sure people are not malingering. They're trying to get these soldiers back out into the field. They don't want people hiding out in the hospital. So he has to repeatedly do this. He has to repeatedly hide. He survives the war. He doesn't get sent off to the front. He manages to survive, and he spends the last couple of months working in a hospital in Vienna. But he looks around him when the dust clears, and millions of people have died. Some of the cadavers that he worked on when he was in medical school come from very nefarious origins. Like, there's some question about who were these guys who were killed. Were they political prisoners? Like, so he walks away from this thing saying, man, the universe spared me. And if I don't give back something almost superhuman, then what was the point of this? Like, why me and not those other million people? Like, how do I make up for 1 million lost lives?
Right.
And he comes to the US and immediately, like, father of CPR, right? So he sees what we're doing for rescue breathing. He knows it doesn't work. Sort of a long, complicated story, but he says, okay, I'm gonna set up a series of tests, and I'm gonna not only prove that this old way, which we've been doing for 100 years, doesn't work, but I'm gonna show that this new way, which other people don't yet believe, is actually the right answer. And so he gets a bunch of volunteers who agree to be sedated and paralyzed for 8 hours at a time for 40 different tests. And he runs a series of recorded tests on them. And he shows that not only do professionals doing this former method do nothing, but complete laymen, like untrained people who don't know what they're doing, can keep you alive using mouth to mouth. He pairs mouth to mouth with chest compressions, trots this around the world, and instantly everybody's like, that's it. The CPR thing, like millions, hundreds of millions of lives saved, affected, changed, because this guy, this 35-year-old doctor said, what you're doing is stupid, and I think I have a better way, and I want to show you. Right. So that's who this guy is. What he's driven by is what he saw in the 30s and 40s. He carries that forward through the 50s, invents CPR, invents the resusci-and doll that every medical professional and layman who's ever taken a CPR class is trained on, since then. And he's in Pittsburgh in the 1960s when David Lawrence dies. And, so he's got the white paper in one hand, he's got a dead David Lawrence in the other. And because he was literally the doctor who received David Lawrence. So he's got those two things, and he's like, man, it's time for a change.
Talk about the universe again, getting in there, some sort of intervention where he just happens to be there at the right time. And, and it continues from there. So then, we've got Freedom House. So tell us about Freedom House.
Yeah. So there's a guy named Jim McCoy, and he had been a bricklayer, been a union organizer. He was a civil rights activist. He got arrested a couple times in Pittsburgh. There's not that the South wasn't a bad place, but there's this assumption that, like, northern cities didn't have these issues. Well, that isn't the case. And, Pittsburgh, like a lot of other places, had issues. Their public pool is integrated, and rather than allow white and black kids to swim together, the city decides to fill in the pool. So it's a city with its own problems. Yeah. And so Jim McCoy becomes a civil rights leader, and he quickly realizes that the thing that people need more than anything else is opportunity. And there's a neighborhood, again, I won't go into all the particulars, but there's a neighborhood that sort of fate has sucker punched, and it's called the Hill District. Mm-hmm. And it went from being a very thriving, culturally influential place to really being down and out. And so McCoy says, all right, I'm gonna start an organization called Freedom House, and what it's going to do is going to train people from the Hill in jobs. The problem is, like, mid 1960s, like, young poor black guys are not getting inspiring opportunities, and so he's kind of striking out a little bit in terms of, like, providing hope and inspiration to people. And then a guy by the name of Phil Hallen approaches him. Hallen runs a medical nonprofit that's specifically there to sort of patch holes in the healthcare safety net that have been cut by racism. And Hallen knows that Pittsburgh has a very poor medical system in terms of like access to healthcare and its EMS system. He looks at what they're doing with the cops and he's like, no, this is not working, right. As evidenced by David Lawrence. So Hallen says, okay, somebody's got to fix this. He reads in the newspaper one day that McCoy's guys are driving a bread truck around, and Hallen's like, hey, if you can deliver bread, you can deliver people. So why don't we just create a little ambulance service, almost like a cab service, and we'll take people to and from your appointments. I mean, it's literally like that modest of an idea, super, super low key. Hey, we're just gonna drive people. We're gonna give people access. That's all this is about. And McCoy sees this, and of course because he sees dispatchers, he sees drivers, he sees mechanics.
Opportunity.
There's stuff here. Like this, people can do this. Yeah, let's do this. So they approach Peter Saffer, again, father CPR, a super dedicated anesthesiologist who has come out here, to kick the world's ass. And he has also been looking at this problem. And so he has said, okay, these police wagons, these weird trucks the volunteer firefighters are driving, the hearses, those things aren't going to work. So he redesigned the ambulance. I mean, literally, like the ambulance that you have today, that's his idea. The captain's chair, wall-mounted suction, the dimensions, the colors on the outside, which through the 90s where everything was the orange and white, that was his idea.
Wow.
He also designs a training program, which initially was 8 months in the classroom, followed by ER, OR, ICU, morgue, OB, the whole bit. But he's got no people. He has this brilliant idea, but he has nobody to carry it out. And then across town, Hallen and McCoy have all these people, but nothing to do with them. So they approach Saffer and they say, hey, we've got this idea for this sort of, little transport service. Do you want to be involved? And he said, no, I have no time for this tiny little idea. However, I've got this revolution and here it is. And he lays it out, which of course to them is one, mind blowing, but two, way too deep, right? Like these waters are way too deep for them. And they explain, like, hey, we just have normal people. This is not going to work. And he's like, you don't understand. I need normal people. I need to prove that this idea is reproducible, that every city in every country or in every state, in every country, everywhere around the world can do this thing. And the only way for that to happen is for ordinary people to walk through the door, learn it, and perfect it. And they said, well, man, we got ordinary people. And then boom, off they go.
Damn. Yes, that is amazing. Again, these are the stories that are out there that are forgotten, but it's here, and I'm so glad that you ended up going through and researching all of this stuff to bring this forward for people to understand this. And again, as we were talking, in the beginning, and just how you said, this intense course that was put out there. And just a lot of the stuff too that they went through, right, when they were going on these runs. One of the parts in the book specifically that I remember were two gentlemen who ended up going out to on a run, and it was a white woman who was there, who I believe she was kind of like upper class or whatever, and they needed her to remove her blouse to assess her and everything, and she's like, no, like, who are you two coming in here? Like, I'm not going to do that. And they were calm, right? And we're just said to her, look, we can simply transport you. However, with what you're going through, we can work on you now as we're going over there, and your chances of living is a lot more if we assist you versus just transport you. And the person's like, okay, let's do this. But there was opposition, there were things like that they went through because of the time, the racism that was out there and just all of it. I mean, there's of course racism today as well, but then just everything that was going on, there were these things. It's like, we're trying to save you here. And luckily in that specific story, that incident, the person's like, okay, yes, I want that help.
Yeah. I mean, there's even a conversation that needs to take place. That woman was having a heart attack and they're trying to, connect her to a monitor and, give her drugs and stuff. And she's resisting. And there's even a conversation of like, hey, what should you prefer? dying
Right.
or allowing me to put my black hands on your white skin, right? Like,
Yeah.
and if there's a pause and like a somebody has to go through, like, I mean, that's not a mindset that I can wrap my head around. But yet it's what they had to deal with every day. I mean, the thing that keeps coming back to me in this story, and every part of the reason that the story needs to be known is, yeah, it's history and it's important, and they deserve to be honored. But like, part of why they deserve to be honored is the grace with which they carry themselves, the ability to stand there. And we work in public safety. Like, it's not super lucrative. You're not there because you're making tons of money. You're there because you believe in what you're doing.
Yes.
And to have that sort of opposition, have somebody say, you are so odious as a human that let me think about whether I want you to touch me or if I want to die. I mean, just think about that for a moment. And how you then sort of smile and say, well, ma'am, here are your options. Here's what I'm going to do. And like, to still want to treat her and not only treat her, like, do a really good job. Do such a good job that the whole world stops in the mid 70s and recognizes how good you are. That is, I mean, that's beyond, I mean, grace. Again, the only word for it is grace.
Yeah. Yeah. Just completely powerful to be able to, to live through that. But, throughout the entire book, that's how they held themselves to the highest standard, professionalism, everything, because they were really doing something that no one had ever done before. Like you said, the word paramedic wasn't even anything, and they were doing all of this and doing it at the best of their ability. And it is, it's just a story definitely that needs to be told and is out there. And as we're kind of going into the wrap up of this episode, I want to talk really quick here about Mr. John Moon. So can you give us a little background on Mr. Moon here, because there's also a part kind of towards the end where there's a lot of different things that happen with this group. There are a lot of good things, but also a lot of people that continue to fight them, and eventually getting closed down and others moving into the city EMS services that were out there. But the bad thing was that even though all of these folks were so highly skilled, more than qualified, they're put into the back. And I think I remember hearing, hold the bag. Yeah. And that's what the position was until they find, like, there was a moment where they're out there and the other ones kind of freeze. And I think it was Mr. Moon who's like, you need to do this, you need to do this. And that's where it all started to change as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, John is, he was born in a very poor part of Atlanta, place in the mid 20th century that didn't have running water or electricity, becomes an orphan after his mother dies, is adopted by family he didn't know existed, and grew up in the Hill District, which is a neighborhood of Pittsburgh that was really, struggling. 60s come along, and he's witnessing the civil rights movement. And, as all kids of that generation were, he believed, like, hey, I can change the world. Like, my opportunity to change the world is here. Like, we can do this. It starts with us. And he graduates and he realizes immediately, like, the world isn't ready. Like, yes, we've marched and we've done sit-ins and we've had all this, there have been riots, and there's like, nothing's changed. Like, people still aren't going to allow us. And so we are going to have to find our way. We're going to have to find the, undeniable, unremovable, unignorable thing that is going to make our mark and prove to the world just what we are. And one night he sees two paramedics and he realizes in an instant, this is my thing. This is it. This is it. So that's how he gets into EMS. And not only for him is being a paramedic life-changing, but Freedom House is life-changing. Part of the reason that Freedom House is 24 Black men at the beginning is they wanted it to be a beacon to people living in the Hill. They wanted them to see their own neighbors, their own friends, their own family out here doing this incredible thing. They wanted to inspire people who, again, the world had kicked around. And that's what they do from the get-go. They're incredibly successful. They become this standard, but yet locally, more importantly, they're a symbol of what's possible. They're a symbol of hope. They're a symbol of what is what people are capable of if given the opportunity. So to the people working at Freedom House, it's more than a job. It is, it is their opportunity to sort of be a beacon for their community, and the pride that they take in that is not something you can put words to. So it ends, and the fact that it ends and how it ends is very, very bitter. But then on top of that, for them to be sitting next to the people who replace them, realizing, wait a minute, these guys know less than we do. They have less experience naturally they have less experience. They have less of an education in EMS. They're less prepared for this. And yet I'm told these are my superiors, that these are the people I'm supposed to be learning from, that these are the guys I'm supposed to sit back and watch, and they don't know what they're doing. And I've just done this incredible thing. I've quite literally just changed the world. And I had this thing that provided so much pride, and it's gone, and it's replaced by these guys who don't know what they're doing. He was very angry and he was very bitter. But when he has that moment and he's standing at this cardiac arrest and these guys panic, that is such vindication for him, because he's not, he's been doing this at this point for nearly a decade. And for him, when this happens, again, it's yet another opportunity. You don't rise through all those things unless you refuse to quit. And part of the way that you refuse to quit is you keep your eye on, hey, where's my next spot? What is my path forward? Like, here's one roadblock. What's my next path through this? And those guys panicking, you're like, okay, this is the way. I take over, I show what I can do, I become undeniable, and I set the record straight once and for all that I'm the guy who can do this, and nobody can anymore tell me to sit there and hold the bag. And that's what happens. That's what they all do. His story becomes emblematic, which is why he's one of the three main characters of the book, but he's one of many. There are a lot of people who are going through the same thing, who are saying to themselves, what's my path forward, and finding it and locking on and refusing to let go. And, that is their legacy. That is the inspiration that they provide, is this, despite everything that was thrown in their way, this refusal to quit, this, the incredible grace that they showed while doing this really difficult job, but this perseverance, this the will that they had to just keep going regardless of what was coming. I mean, it's you just have to stop and just sort of, just stand back and stare and wonder and just think, man, it is unbelievable. It is truly unbelievable what they did.
There, you talk about that moment of bitterness, when that portion comes to an end. And I remember I was sitting on the plane listening to this, and I myself was bitter. Like, I was pissed off. I was sitting there listening. I thought, hell no. It's like, after all of that, really? But then that moment of, because even through all of that, still, as you said, grace. They continue to keep that grace and all, and professionalism. The moment that there was a call that was out, and there was an officer who was opposed to what they were doing, but gets on the radio and yells, "Get me Freedom House."
Yeah.
That moment right there, just like, I had to pause for a moment as I'm sitting there. And I'm sure the people around me were like, what the hell is his problem? Because I'm listening to this and I remember going like this, but sitting in the seat, I was like, yes, like, hell yes. Like, that was, again, another moment of triumph, because they had gone through a lot. And then to hear that, and especially from someone who had opposed so much of what they were doing, to then tell them again, because you've got their own local dispatch who's trying to cancel Freedom House out. And the guy again is like, no, send them here because I need someone who knows what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah.
And that was such a great moment.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and that would come from the police, it could have come from anyone else, but spoiler alert, Freedom House and the police did not get along very well.
Yeah.
Mid-70s, a group of black guys and the cops, it was not a perfect marriage. And, it's one thing to be recognized. It's another thing to be recognized by the people who all along have tried to put their foot on your neck. Right. And that moment for them, anyone who was there that day and heard that over the radio, they will all tell you, like, man, that was like, and it came right before the end, which is the bitter irony of the whole thing. But that moment, that was a vindication. That was from the people who didn't want them and the people who tried to stop them, saying, you know what, like, my hat is off. Like, sort of like two football teams play each other and they beat the hell, or two boxers beat the hell out of each other. But if I knock you out in the first round, when the fight's over, I'm just going to walk away. But if you and I, like, we go toe to toe, and in the 12th round, the bell rings and I win, like, you and I, like, there's a brotherhood now. Like, we have been through it together. And, you know, I think that's kind of what that is. It's like the combatants in the field. That police officer did not want, he was probably not sad that Freedom House was going. Mm-hmm. He did not want Freedom House. And yet he recognized, like, you know what, like, these guys, man, these guys. And that's what that moment was.
Powerful. And we're gonna go into the wrap up here of this episode. It has been amazing to have you on to learn more about your own background, your story, what it was like for you as a paramedic, but of course the books that you've written, especially this one here, American Sirens. And there's a part towards the end, and I won't give it all or anything like that. There's just one thing that I will mention, and it is just a portion in there where you write how it's mentioned, you know, we were here. You know, it's kind of, you know, in a remembrance, and just that moment in time of them saying, you know, we did this and we were here. And it was listening to that last portion, I cried, because I was like, damn, like, this is a powerful story. And it was one that I did not expect. I'll be honest, I didn't know what to expect going into it. And then, you know, you get to the end and there's that moment, and I just, wow. It was one that that I will not forget. So thank you for bringing this out there and shedding light on a forgotten part of history that is so important that people need to know, and getting to know you as well. This has been awesome. So what is one thing that you would like people to take away, you know, from this book, and just, you know, about you as well?
You know, in terms of the book, none of this happened all that long ago. You know, the things that these guys went through, the things that the country was going through in 68, you know, I always said to myself growing up, like, man, people living in 1968 must have thought the world was coming to an end. I think you could say that for people who have been alive since 2020. It feels like the world's coming to an end.
Yeah.
It was frustrating, but also enlightening to see how many of the problems that existed in the 60s and 70s are still problems today. And, you know, so on the one hand, I guess the takeaway from that is, like, we've got to be good to each other, because these things, like, none of this is ancient history. These are things that have just happened. I mean, just barely, again, seconds before we were born, this was all going on and continues. And so, you know, we got to be good to each other. Right. And, you know, and that's really, like, this story, like, going out and accepting this job and doing this really difficult job, even when the person you were trying to save didn't want you. That's the grace that they carried forward. We should take that. We should take a little bit of that and bring it into our daily lives. And I think if we did, we would all be living in a much better place. You know, I mean, I think to me, that's the biggest takeaway from this story.
Amazing. Again, it has been an honor to have you on. And how can people find out more about you, website, social media, you know, all of that good stuff? How can they find out more, and how can they get a hold of this book?
Oh man, it's been great to be here. I really appreciate it. Yeah. So website, kevinhazzard.com. It feels like very, very old. Even say that. You know, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram. And you know, the book is all over. It is in any bookstore that you know. It's Amazon, it's Barnes & Noble, it's in the one that's around the corner from you. I was in several airports last week. It was in those airports. So it's out there. It's in the world. You listen to the audiobook, you know, you can download it. There's a Kindle version, so it is everywhere, and you know, I'm hoping y'all rate it.
Awesome. All right. Well, excellent. Again, it was awesome to have you on. It was an honor, and I will be right back here with you in just one moment. So for those who are watching and listening, if you have any comments or questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us, and that's going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that is wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter. That is @91podcast. You can like us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/Within the Trenches Podcast. This episode is sponsored by INdigital as well as Carbyne. And a big shout out to patrons. As always, if you want to become a patron and help support us, you can check us out, and that is patreon.com/WTT Podcast. Also, the registration preparation for DTBG4 is up, so make sure to check that out. It's going to be an excellent one. And this can be seen on YouTube, Twitter, as well as Facebook, and you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.